Stop pretending you belong here, my daughter-in-law laughed across the dinner table. My son didn't look up. He kept cutting his steak, slow and careful, as if nothing had been said. I didn't answer. I didn't ask her to repeat it. I didn't stand up right away. I simply folded my napkin and set it beside my plate. I'm glad you're here. Stay with me until the end and tell me the city you're listening from. I didn't know that sentence would be the moment I finally understood where I stood in my own family. It was supposed to be an ordinary Sunday dinner, the kind I used to host every week before my knees started aching and before my house stopped feeling like mine. The dining room smelled of roasted chicken and rosemary, the same recipe I'd been making for over 30 years, the same oak table my late husband refinished by hand one summer when we couldn't afford a vacation. There were 6 of us sitting there, my son, his wife, 2 of their friends, and me at the far end of the table closest to the window. No one had asked me to sit there. It just happened that way. When she laughed, it wasn't loud. It wasn't angry. It was light, casual, like she'd made a clever joke and expected everyone to appreciate it. Stop pretending you belong here. Someone smiled awkwardly. Someone else reached for the wine. My son said nothing. I looked down at my hands, the skin thin now, spotted with age. These were the hands that rocked him to sleep during storms, the hands that packed his lunches, signed permission slips, held the ladder while he fixed his first bike, the hands that helped pay their down payment when money was tight and they didn't want to go to the bank. I had belonged then. Apparently, that membership had expired. No one defended me. No one changed the subject. The conversation simply moved on, stepping around me like a chair pulled too far into the aisle. I finished my water. It tasted flat. The house felt different in that moment, smaller, like I was visiting instead of living there, like every sound, the clink of cutlery, the low laughter, was happening somewhere I wasn't invited to be part of. I realized something then. This wasn't the first time I'd been made to feel invisible. It was just the first time it had been said out loud. I remembered holidays where my chair was moved last minute, decisions made without asking me, conversations that stopped when I entered the room. I had told myself I was imagining it, that I was being sensitive, that it was better to keep the peace, so I stayed quiet. After dinner, I stood up slowly. My knees protested, but I steadied myself on the back of the chair. I thanked everyone for the meal. Even though I had cooked half of it, I picked up my purse. No one offered to walk me out. My daughter-in-law was still smiling. Upstairs, in the room I now slept in, the smaller one, not the master, I sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the house settle. I didn't cry. I didn't call a friend. I just sat there, thinking. Belonging isn't something you pretend, and dignity isn't something anyone can take from you unless you hand it over. That night, I decided I would stop pretending too. The house was quiet the next morning. Not the peaceful kind of quiet I used to enjoy with a cup of coffee and the newspaper, but the hollow kind that makes every sound feel out of place. I woke up early as I always did. Old habits don't disappear just because your place in the family has shifted. I folded my blanket, smoothed the corners, and sat on the edge of the bed for a moment before standing. The floor was cold under my feet. I noticed it more than usual. Downstairs, I could hear movement, cabinets opening, a low voice, her voice, light, unbothered. I didn't go down right away. Instead, I looked around the room I now occupied. The smaller bedroom at the end of the hall, the one that used to be a guest room. My clothes were folded neatly in the dresser, but none of my pictures were on the walls. No family photos, no memories, just beige paint and a single lamp that buzzed faintly when it was on. It struck me then how carefully my presence had been minimized. When I finally walked into the kitchen, no one looked surprised to see me. That hurt more than if they had been startled. It meant this arrangement had already settled in their minds. My daughter-in-law stood at the counter, scrolling on her phone with one hand, stirring oatmeal with the other. My son sat at the table, reading something on his tablet. The chair across from him, the one my late husband used to sit in, remained empty. "Morning," I said. "Morning," my son replied without looking up. She nodded, still smiling, still comfortable. I poured myself a cup of coffee. The pot was nearly empty. I hadn't been asked if I wanted any. I didn't mention it. I added water and grounds, started a new pot, and waited. No one thanked me. As the coffee brewed, my mind drifted backward, not to last night, but to the months before it. The gradual changes I had ignored, the way decisions were made without consulting me, the way my suggestions were brushed aside, the way I was praised for being easy and understanding. I had mistaken tolerance for love. I sat at the table, hands wrapped around my mug. My son finally glanced at me, just briefly, then back to his screen. "Busy day," he said. I nodded. "I imagine so." That was it. The conversation ended there. After breakfast, I went back upstairs and closed the door. I didn't lock it. I no longer felt the need to protect myself in that way. Something inside me had already shut. I sat on the bed and thought about my husband, about the promises he'd made when he was still strong enough to say them out loud, about the way he used to look at me when the room got tense, as if to remind me I wasn't alone. I realized then how much space his absence had created, not just emotionally, but practically. Without him, I had become negotiable. By the afternoon, the house was empty. They had gone out together. I wasn't told where. I didn't ask. I walked through the living room slowly, touching the back of the couch, the edge of the bookshelf. These were things I had chosen, paid for, maintained. Yet I felt like a visitor moving through someone else's life. I stopped by the front window and looked out at the street. Cars passed. Neighbors walked their dogs. Life went on, indifferent to what had shifted inside that house. That was when it became clear to me. Last night hadn't been a mistake. It had been permission. And now that it had been spoken out loud, I knew exactly what I needed to do next. The next few days passed without confrontation, but not without clarity. I began to notice the small things. The things that had always been there, quietly rearranging my place in the house while I told myself I was imagining it. My laundry basket was moved from the hallway to the corner of my room. Not asked, just done. My daughter-in-law said it was more efficient that way. I nodded. The pantry shelves changed. The items I bought were pushed to the back. New labels appeared on containers I had filled for years. I reached for the sugar one morning and found it gone, replaced with something else. Something organic, something expensive, something I hadn't chosen. At dinner, conversations flowed around me, not to me. Plans were made, weekends discussed, vacations hinted at. No one asked if I was free or interested or needed anything. Once I tried to join in. "That restaurant downtown," I said carefully. "Your father and I used to." "We've already been there." My daughter-in-law cut in. "It's not really your kind of place." She smiled when she said it, like she was doing me a favor. My son didn't correct her. I began to understand the rhythm of it all. She spoke. He allowed. I adjusted. One afternoon, I opened the mail and saw an envelope addressed to both of them. Inside were documents I recognized immediately. Property tax information, utility accounts, things that used to come to my name. I read every line slowly. Nothing had been transferred yet, but it was being prepared. That night, I didn't sleep much. Not because I was afraid, but because I was alert. Wide awake in a way I hadn't been in years. When you stop pretending everything is fine, your mind sharpens. I thought about the times I defended her to friends, told people she was just strong-willed, that she meant well, that I didn't mind helping out, staying quiet, stepping aside. I had mistaken my silence for grace. On Thursday, she asked me to watch the house while they went out. Not the grandchildren, just the house. "We'll be late," she said, already putting on her coat. "Don't wait up." As if I had been. I stood alone in the kitchen long after they left, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. I noticed how nothing in that space felt like it belonged to me anymore, not even the air. I went upstairs and pulled out a small box from the back of my closet. Inside were papers I hadn't looked at in a long time. Statements, deeds, documents my husband had insisted I keep copies of, just in case. At the time, I'd laughed and told him he worried too much. Now I understood. I didn't rush. I didn't panic. I read everything carefully, line by line, dates, names, signatures. My name, still there. Downstairs, the clock ticked loudly. Each second felt deliberate, like a reminder. When they came home, I was already in bed. The door closed, the light off. I heard them talking, laughing, comfortable. She thought the matter was settled. But what she didn't realize was this. I had spent a lifetime learning how to endure quietly, and endurance, when paired with clarity, becomes something else entirely. By Friday morning, I had settled into a routine that required very little interaction. I woke up early, made my bed, and moved through the house quietly, not out of fear, out of observation. When you stop trying to be included, you start seeing things more clearly. I took my coffee upstairs now. It saved time. It saved energy. It saved me from unnecessary looks. From the window of the small bedroom, I could see the driveway. I watched my son leave for work that morning. He didn't wave. He didn't look up. The car backed out smoothly, just like it always had. Some habits remain untouched, even when people change. I sat at the desk and opened the folder I'd taken out the night before. I didn't spread the papers out dramatically. I didn't feel rushed. I had waited years to feel secure. I could wait a few more minutes to understand exactly where I stood. The documents told a quiet story, one that hadn't been shared with me. There were notes scribbled in the margins, reminders, appointments scheduled without my name on them, a meeting with an advisor I hadn't been told about. Nothing illegal, nothing final, just enough preparation to make things easier later. Later for them. I remembered my husband insisting we keep our finances clear, separate copies, clear records. He had trusted our son, but he had trusted paperwork more. I ran my finger along my name where it appeared. Still there, still valid. Downstairs, the house creaked as the heat turned on. I heard footsteps. My daughter-in-law was awake now. I could tell by the way cabinets closed firmly, confidently, like someone who believed they owned the space. She called up once. Just once. "Are you planning to be home today?" "Yes," I answered. "That's good," she said. "Someone should be." That was all. I closed the folder and placed it back in the box. I didn't hide it deeper. I didn't lock it away. I had spent too many years thinking protection meant secrecy. Sometimes protection is simply being informed. In the afternoon, I went for a walk. The weather was mild, the kind of early fall day that makes your joints feel almost cooperative. I walked 2 blocks, then 3. Past houses that had watched my family grow, past people who still nodded when they saw me. Out there, I still existed. When I returned, there was a package by the door, addressed to my daughter-in-law. I didn't bring it inside. I left it where it was and went upstairs. Later, I heard her voice again, frustrated this time. "Did you see the delivery?" "Yes," I said calmly. "It's outside." She paused, just a second too long. "Oh," she said, "I thought you'd bring it in." I didn't think it was mine. The silence that followed was brief but noticeable. That evening, my son came home late. He looked tired. He always did lately. I wondered when he'd last noticed that I was tired too. At dinner, the conversation was practical. Schedules, bills, weather. I was included only when necessary. I didn't interrupt. I didn't push back. I ate slowly and listened. Because by then, I had learned something important. People reveal their intentions not in what they say to your face, but in what they stop including you in. And once you see that clearly, you stop asking where you belong. Saturday arrived without ceremony. No raised voices, no arguments, just the steady continuation of a life that no longer made room for me. I spent the morning organizing my things. Not everything, just enough to understand what was truly mine. Clothes I had bought myself, books with my name written on the inside cover, a few framed photos I hadn't hung because there never seemed to be wall space anymore. Downstairs, I could hear movement, laughter, music playing softly from a speaker I didn't recognize. New things appeared in the house often now, new routines, new preferences. None of them asked for my input. Around noon, my daughter-in-law knocked on my door. Not gently, not impatiently, just firm enough to remind me this wasn't a private space in her mind. "We're having people over later," she said. "So just a heads up." "That's fine," I replied. She lingered for a moment as if expecting something else. An offer to help. A question. When none came, she nodded and walked away. I didn't go downstairs while they prepared. I didn't hover. I stayed where I was and listened. Chairs being moved, dishes clinking, the sound of a home being arranged without me. In the afternoon, I called an old friend, someone who knew me before I was careful with my words. "How are you holding up?" she asked. "I'm clear," I said. She understood what that meant. When guests arrived, I stayed upstairs. No one came to invite me down. I could hear voices through the floor, compliments being exchanged, stories told. My daughter-in-law's laugh, light and confident, filled the house. At one point, I heard my name. "Is your mother-in-law joining us?" someone asked. There was a pause, short, measured. "She prefers her space," my daughter-in-law said. That was not true, but it was convenient. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the small box again, the one with the documents. I didn't open it this time. I already knew what was inside. Belonging, I realized, had been quietly redefined. Not by legal papers, not yet, but by comfort, by assumption, by the absence of resistance. Later that evening, the house filled with the smell of food I hadn't cooked. I wasn't hungry anyway. When the guests finally left, I went downstairs to get a glass of water. The kitchen was cluttered, plates stacked, glasses unwashed. No one offered to clean yet. My son was sitting at the table, scrolling on his phone. "Long day," he said. "Yes," I answered. He hesitated. "Everything okay?" It wasn't a real question, not the kind that waits for an answer. "Yes," I said again. He nodded, relieved, and went back to his screen. That was the moment I understood the role I had been assigned. Not a problem, not a priority, just a presence that functioned best when it stayed quiet. I finished my water and set the glass down gently. I didn't sigh. I didn't complain. I went back upstairs and closed the door. Lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling and thought about how long I had mistaken patience for stability. How often I had told myself this was temporary, that things would shift back. They wouldn't. Because nothing changes when silence is mistaken for consent. And that night, with the house finally still, I made a decision that didn't require anyone else's approval. Sunday morning arrived quietly. No guests, no music. Just the sound of footsteps overhead and the low hum of the dishwasher from the night before. I stayed in my room longer than usual, not out of avoidance, but because there was no reason to hurry anymore. When I finally went downstairs, my son was already dressed, jacket on, keys in hand. "I'm heading out," he said. "Drive safe," I replied. He paused at the door, as if considering something. Then he nodded and left. My daughter-in-law didn't appear until later. She moved through the house confidently, opening windows, adjusting cushions, changing small things that reminded me this place responded to her now. She noticed me sitting at the table. "We're thinking of rearranging the living room," she said. "It'll make more sense." "That's fine," I answered. She smiled, relieved by the lack of resistance. "Also," she added casually, "we might need to move some storage around. You have a lot of boxes." "I do," I said. She waited. I didn't offer anything else. Later that afternoon, I went through my paperwork again, not because I doubted what I'd seen, but because repetition brings confidence. I read slowly, carefully. Nothing had changed. My name was still on the deed. My signature still carried weight. Nothing had been removed without my consent. What had changed was their assumption. I thought about the way my daughter-in-law spoke, the ease, the comfort. She spoke like someone who believed the future was already settled, like someone who thought patience meant permission. In the early evening, my son returned. He looked tired again, more tired than usual. "Mom," he said, standing in the doorway of the kitchen, "we need to talk about a few things." I turned to face him. "Of course." He gestured toward the table. We sat. He cleared his throat. "We're just trying to plan ahead, make things easier down the line." "For whom?" I asked gently. He hesitated. "For everyone," I nodded. "That sounds reasonable." He relaxed slightly. "We were thinking maybe you'd want to downsize eventually. Less responsibility." "Eventually," I repeated. "Yes," he said. "No rush. Just something to think about." I looked at my son, really looked at him, the boy I had raised, the man he had become. The distance between those two things felt wider than ever. "I've been thinking too," I said. He smiled. "Good. I think clarity is important," I continued, "especially when families live together." His smile faded just a little. "I agree," he said. "I'm glad," I replied. He waited. I didn't elaborate. After he left the room, I stayed seated for a long time, not upset, not confused, just certain. That night, I wrote a short list, not demands, not complaints, just facts, dates, names, documents, phone numbers, things my husband had taught me to keep track of. Preparation, I remembered, isn't aggression. It's responsibility. Upstairs, I placed the list neatly beside the box. I didn't feel the need to hide it. Secrets were no longer necessary. As I turned off the light, I felt something unfamiliar settle over me. Not anger, not fear, resolve. They believed I belonged wherever they allowed me to be. But belonging, I had learned, doesn't come from permission. It comes from knowing exactly where you stand and choosing what to do with that knowledge. Monday changed the pace of the house. Not dramatically. Not in a way anyone else seemed to notice. But I felt it the moment I woke up. The air felt lighter, not kinder, just clearer. I went downstairs earlier than usual. The kitchen was empty. The counters were clean. Someone had already left for work. Someone else was still asleep. I made myself breakfast and sat at the table. I didn't rush. I didn't check the time. For once, nothing depended on me being available. Later that morning, I drove myself to the bank. I hadn't planned to. I simply felt it was time. The parking lot was half full. I parked near the entrance and walked in slowly, my purse tucked under my arm. The teller recognized me. She always had. "Good morning," she said warmly. "Good morning," I replied. I asked for copies. Nothing dramatic. Just confirmations, names, dates, current standing. The kind of information you should already know, but often don't until something shifts. She printed the papers and slid them across the counter. "Everything looks in order," she said. I thanked her and placed them neatly into my folder. On the drive home, I didn't feel victorious. I felt steady. There's a difference. When I returned, my daughter-in-law's car was in the driveway. She was home early. I noted it without comment. She was in the living room when I came in, on her phone again, legs crossed comfortably on the couch. She glanced up. "Did you go out?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "Everything okay?" "Yes." She watched me for a moment, as if trying to read something on my face. I didn't give her anything to work with. In the afternoon, I sorted through old photographs. Not all of them. Just enough to remind myself who I had been before I learned how to stay quiet for the sake of peace. There I was, younger, standing beside my husband, laughing, unafraid to take up space. I realized something important then. I hadn't lost my voice. I had postponed it. That evening, my son came home earlier than usual. He found me at the table, papers stacked neatly, my posture relaxed. "Hey," he said, "can we talk?" I looked up. Of course. He sat across from me. He seemed unsure of where to place his hands. "I feel like things have been different," he said carefully. "They have," I agreed. He exhaled. "We don't want you to feel uncomfortable here." I met his eyes. "Then don't make decisions about me without me." He blinked. "We weren't." "You were," I said gently. "You just didn't call it that." He was quiet for a moment. "I thought you were okay with it," he finally said. "I was patient," I replied. "Those are not the same thing." He nodded slowly. That night, I returned to my room and placed the new documents into the box. Everything fit. That mattered more than it should have. I sat on the bed and thought about how easily people confuse silence with agreement. How often kindness is mistaken for weakness. Downstairs, the house settled again. Familiar sounds, familiar walls, but something had changed. Not around me, within me. And once that happens, the balance never quite returns to what it was before. Tuesday unfolded without tension, which made it more revealing than any argument could have been. My daughter-in-law spoke less that morning. Not out of kindness, but calculation. When people sense a shift they don't understand, they watch more closely. I noticed it when she paused before speaking, when she waited for my response instead of assuming it. At breakfast, she mentioned a meeting later in the week. Something about paperwork. Something vague. "We're trying to get things organized," she said lightly. "That's sensible," I replied. She glanced at my face again, searching, measuring. My son sat quietly, stirring his coffee longer than necessary. The spoon tapped the mug once, then stopped. I finished eating and cleared my place. I washed my own plate and dried it carefully, not as a favor, as a boundary. Late that morning, I received a call. It was brief, professional, polite, an appointment confirmation. I didn't announce it. I didn't feel the need to. In the afternoon, the house filled with an unfamiliar energy. My daughter-in-law moved more quickly than usual, closing drawers, rechecking lists, making calls behind closed doors. At one point, she asked me a question she hadn't asked in years. "Do you remember where we keep the old files?" "Yes." She waited. I didn't move. "Oh," she said finally. "Never mind. I'll find them." She didn't. That evening, my son approached me again. This time, his voice was careful. "Mom," he said, "have you been talking to anyone about plans?" I looked up from the book I was reading. "What kind of plans?" He hesitated. "Just future stuff." "I've always thought about the future," I said. "That hasn't changed." He nodded, uneasy. "We just want everything to be smooth," he said. "So do I." The conversation ended there. Later, alone in my room, I opened the box once more. I didn't reread everything. I didn't need to. Familiarity had replaced doubt. I added one more document to the folder, placed it neatly on top. Outside, the house went quiet earlier than usual. Doors closed softly. Footsteps moved away from my room instead of toward it. That was new. For years, I had made myself available, always nearby, always ready to fill gaps no one else noticed. Now, I was simply present, and presence without compliance unsettles people. The following morning, I heard my daughter-in-law on the phone. Her voice was controlled, but tight. Yes, I thought it was handled already. No, I don't think she realizes. She stopped speaking when she noticed me in the hallway. "Good morning," I said. She smiled quickly, too quickly. "Morning." I walked past her without slowing. In my room, I sat on the bed and took a breath. Not because I was nervous, because something had crossed a line. They had assumed I would remain still. They had assumed I would remain grateful. They had assumed I would remain quiet. Assumptions only work until the other person stops playing their part. I didn't need to confront anyone. I didn't need to raise my voice. All I needed was time. And now, for the first time since that dinner, they were beginning to realize I had plenty of it. Wednesday forced the issue without anyone saying so directly. It started with a meeting at the dining table. Not announced, not formal, just assumed. My daughter-in-law had papers spread out in front of her, neatly arranged, color-coded tabs, the kind of setup meant to look organized and authoritative. My son sat beside her, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes already tired. "Since we're all home," she said, "we thought it'd be good to go over a few things." I remained standing. "Go ahead," I said. She gestured to the chair across from them. The same chair I'd been quietly moved away from weeks earlier. I didn't sit. She cleared her throat. "We've been reviewing expenses, long-term planning, making sure everything makes sense." "That's important," I replied. She nodded, encouraged. "Exactly. And with you living here, it's only fair we're all clear on expectations." My son shifted in his seat. She continued, "We think it might be time to formalize some arrangements, responsibilities, contributions." I looked at the papers. None of them were addressed to me. "What kind of arrangements?" I asked calmly. "Well," she said, smiling politely, "just to avoid confusion later." Later again, I finally sat down, not because she asked, because I chose to. "I agree," I said. "Clarity matters." My son looked relieved. She slid a page toward me. "This outlines how we see things moving forward." I didn't touch it. Instead, I folded my hands on the table. "Before we talk about that," I said, "there are a few things we should all be clear on." Her smile tightened. "I've lived in this house a long time," I continued. "I've contributed financially, practically, and otherwise. None of that was temporary." My son frowned slightly. "Mom, I'm not upset," I said gently. "I'm precise." That stopped him. "I don't have an issue with planning," I said, "but planning should be accurate." She leaned back. "Of course." "So," I went on, "any discussion about my role should include the full picture." She glanced at my son. He didn't meet her eyes. "What picture?" she asked. I stood up again. "The documented one," I said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I didn't threaten. I simply gathered my purse. "We can continue this conversation after everyone has the same information," I said. My son looked confused now. "What information?" "You'll know soon enough," I replied. I left the room. Upstairs, I closed my door and sat on the bed. My hands were steady, my breathing even. Downstairs, I could hear voices, low, urgent, uneven. I didn't listen closely. That afternoon, the house felt different, the air heavier, movement more cautious. No one knocked on my door. No one followed up. They had expected compliance. They had prepared for agreement. They had not prepared for accuracy. That evening, I ate alone, not because I was excluded, because I preferred it. For the first time since the dinner that started all of this, I felt something settle firmly into place. Not victory, not revenge, position. And once positions are clarified, the rest tends to resolve itself, whether people like the outcome or not. Thursday morning arrived with an invitation. Not spoken, not written, just implied. My daughter-in-law was unusually quiet at breakfast. My son barely touched his food. The tension sat between us, untouched. After they left for work, I stayed at the table a little longer than usual. I finished my tea. I wiped the surface clean. I left nothing behind. By early afternoon, my phone rang. "Mom," my son said, "can we talk tonight?" "Just us." "Yes," I replied. We agreed on a time. Nothing dramatic, nothing urgent. That evening, he came to my room and knocked. Not once, twice. I opened the door and stepped aside. He sat on the chair by the window. I remained standing for a moment, then sat across from him on the bed. I didn't realize things had gotten this complicated, he said. They didn't, I replied. They became clear. He looked down at his hands. We were just trying to plan responsibly. I believe you, I said, but responsibility includes accuracy. He nodded slowly. She feels like you don't trust her, he added. I met his eyes. Trust isn't something you demand. It's something you preserve. He swallowed. She thought you were comfortable letting us handle things. I was comfortable not being consulted, I said. That's different. Silence filled the room. Not awkward. Necessary. I've made an appointment, I continued. Not to cause trouble, to ensure clarity. His head lifted. What kind of appointment? The kind your father insisted on, I said. The kind that keeps everyone honest. He leaned back slightly. You didn't tell us. I didn't need permission, I replied. He sighed. She's worried. I'm aware. She thinks you're upset. I'm informed, I said. That landed. I don't want this to become a conflict, he said quietly. Neither do I replied. That's why it won't. He looked confused. What does that mean? It means we stop guessing, I said, and start acknowledging what already exists. He sat with that for a moment. You've done a lot for us, he said finally. I know, I replied. I never asked to be repaid. I only asked not to be erased. His shoulders dropped. I didn't see it that way, he admitted. I know, I said. That's why I'm telling you now. When he left the room, I didn't feel relief. I felt alignment. There's a difference. Downstairs, I heard my daughter-in-law moving around. Cabinets opening, doors closing, restless energy. She didn't come up. That night, I slept deeply. The next morning, an envelope appeared on the kitchen counter, addressed to all three of us, neatly placed, impossible to ignore. My daughter-in-law stood nearby, arms crossed. What's that? She asked. Information, I replied. My son entered the room and froze. We should all be present, I said calmly. They sat. I remained standing. I slid the envelope toward the center of the table. No accusations, I said. No arguments. Just facts. My daughter-in-law hesitated before reaching for it. As she opened the envelope, I watched her expression change. Slowly, quietly. She didn't laugh. She didn't smile. For the first time since that dinner, she looked uncertain. And uncertainty, I had learned, was where balance began to return. The room stayed quiet after the envelope was opened. Not the kind of quiet that waits for someone to speak. The kind that settles in once there's nothing left to deny. My daughter-in-law flipped through the pages slowly. Her movements were careful now. No laughter. No comments. Just reading. My son leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes fixed on the documents. He didn't touch them. Not yet. These are current, I said calmly. Verified this week. She looked up. I know what you thought, I replied. That's why this conversation matters. She set the papers down and crossed her arms, not defensively, thoughtfully. This changes things, she said. Yes, I answered. It clarifies them. My son finally reached out and picked up the top page. He read it once, then again, his jaw tightened slightly. You never mentioned this, he said quietly. I was never asked, I replied. The words landed without force. They didn't need it. He exhaled and leaned back. We assumed. I know, I said. Assumptions have a way of becoming plans. My daughter-in-law glanced at him, then back at me. Her voice was measured now. So what happens next? I considered her question carefully. What happens next, I said, is that we all stop guessing. She nodded slowly. You're saying you want more control. I'm saying I already have it, I replied. I'm just acknowledging it now. Silence followed again. My son rubbed his temples. Why didn't you say something sooner? Because I believed patience would be understood, I said. It wasn't. That seemed to reach him. I never meant for you to feel pushed aside, he said. I know, I replied, but intention doesn't erase impact. My daughter-in-law shifted in her chair. I didn't realize you felt excluded. I met her eyes. You didn't ask. She didn't look away this time. For the first time since that dinner, the balance at the table felt different. Not tilted. Not hostile, just real. We need to rethink a few things, my son said finally. Yes, I agreed. Together, he added. That depends, I replied. He looked up. On what? On respect, I said. Not courtesy, not politeness, respect. He nodded. My daughter-in-law inhaled, then exhaled slowly. I can work with that. I stood up and gathered the documents, not to take them away, to remind them whose hands they belonged in. I'm not here to compete, I said. I'm here to be recognized. No one argued. That evening, the house felt unsettled, but not hostile. Conversations were quieter, movements more careful. I returned to my room and closed the door, not to retreat, to rest. For the first time in weeks, my shoulders relaxed. Downstairs, voices continued, planning, revising, adjusting. They were finally doing what I had done all along, adapting. And this time, they knew I was no longer invisible. Not negotiable, not mistaken, present, and prepared. The following weeks settled into a new rhythm. Not perfect, not warm, but honest. There were no more meetings held without notice. No more papers slid across the table as if they were favors. Conversations happened with pauses now, with listening, with restraint. My daughter-in-law no longer laughed the way she used to. Not at me, not around me. Her tone shifted, careful and measured, as if she were relearning the space we shared. My son tried more than he spoke. He checked in. He asked before assuming. Sometimes he caught himself mid-sentence, realizing how close he was to falling back into old habits. I noticed. I didn't comment. I resumed small routines that had quietly disappeared. Morning walks, afternoon tea at the table, not upstairs. I took my time again. No one rushed me. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the house filled with that soft amber light, my daughter-in-law stopped me in the hallway. I didn't understand before, she said. Not apologetic, just honest. I thought silence meant agreement. It often does, I replied, until it doesn't. She nodded. I see that now. That was enough. I didn't need apologies. I didn't need acknowledgement spoken out loud. I needed the shift to remain. And it did. Months later, the dining table looked the same. Same wood, same chairs, same view out the window. But the air around it had changed. One Sunday, we sat down to dinner again. Just the three of us. No guests, no audience. The food was simple. Nothing special. My daughter-in-law passed the bowl of vegetables and waited until I took some before setting it down. My son asked my opinion about something small, a practical question. One he could have answered himself. I answered anyway. No one laughed. No one looked away. And I realized then how quietly things had come full circle. The night she told me to stop pretending I belonged, I had believed her for just a moment. That was the only mistake I made. Because belonging was never something she had the authority to grant or revoke. It had never left me. It lived in my history, in my name, in the choices I made when no one was watching. I didn't reclaim my place by raising my voice. I reclaimed it by standing still long enough for the truth to surface. When dinner ended, I stood up first, not to leave, just to clear my plate. My daughter-in-law reached for the dishes. I've got it, she said. I let her. Later that night in my room, I opened the window slightly and let the cool air in. The house was quiet again, but this time it didn't feel hollow. It felt settled. I thought back to that dinner, to the laughter, to the words meant to shrink me. They had done the opposite. They had reminded me who I was. And that, I learned, is the quiet power of knowing your worth. You don't have to announce it. You don't have to defend it. You simply stop pretending you don't belong.